Hello and welcome to Uncommon Law, my podcast about true stories from my life experience of over 50 years as a lawyer and trial judge. This is a look at the law from the inside out, stuff they don't teach in law school. This is Judge Rudy Greco, retired justice of the New York State Supreme Court. The story is about a fellow named Sandino who was 4 feet 8 inches tall. Sandino was in his own Panamanian accent, a jockey. He was a jockey at the racetrack. And he was a very good jockey and had been doing very, very well until a certain incident took place. And what happened was Sandino was arrested for possession of a joint. Well, a joint is a little battery-operated device that's basically a buzzer that's jockeys use sometimes surreptitiously to get a horse to jump out of the starting gate faster than they would normally. If a horse was a particularly slow starter and it needed a boost, they would use a joint. And it was common use at the racetrack. People in the know said if you stood alongside the fence in the far back stretch of the racetrack, the part that was way, way beyond the stands, facing the stands, but all the way on the other side of the racetrack, you'd need a helmet out there on the sidewalk from jockeys throwing these joints over the fence after they used them in the starting gate. And the harrow men were the guys who operated the car and dragged the rake between races and smoothed out and raked the racetrack surface. The harrow men will tell you that invariably every day they would come up with joints stuck in the teeth of the harrow. It was a common thing, and Sandino came to us from other horsemen who said he had a really sad story to tell, and it was a story of great injustice. And like most young lawyers, we ended up with this thing because we like to tilt at windmills, and it was a good, like Don Quixote, and it was a really, really sad story. When we met Sandino, he was just back from Panama, where he had been for 3 years. The immediate year before he returned, he spent convalescing. The 2 years before that, he had been a jockey in Panama. And the reason why he had been in Panama was he was banned from New York tracks. And the reason why he was banned from New York tracks was ridiculous and was the cause of, or the result of, a great injustice. Sandino was arrested for having a joint. And I asked him, I said, Sandy, did you have the joint? He said, no. He said, I didn't have a joint on that day. He says, the horse I had in the race when I was arrested was a very good starter. He didn't need any help getting out of the gate. There was no reason to have a joint. I've used them on occasion. Every jockey used them on occasion. He said, but I'm no saint. He said, but I was totally innocent and I didn't have one on this time. I said, well, what happened? He said, well, the Chief Pinkerton, who was an ex-FBI guy, he was a retired FBI guy, he said, that guy came over to me and said, give me that joint. He says, I didn't have it. And he dropped one at my feet. He said, just like they do, like the dropsy cases. We were familiar with that as criminal lawyers because narcotics cops did that all the time. It's called that dropsy testimony or flaking a defendant. They didn't have anything on them. They said, oh, yeah, what's that? Boom. And they dropped something at their feet and a package of marijuana or heroin or whatever it was they were looking for, cocaine. And they would use that as the testimony to incriminate the defendant. So Sandy said, this guy, he flaked me. He dropped this thing on me. I didn't have it. I said, well, why would he do such a thing? He says, well, I'll tell you, because he's a degenerate gambler. He gambles on all the races, and he's always asking all the jockeys for tips, for information on their horses. How's your horse going to do today? Your horse going to win? You got a winner here? What do you think? He said, and I would never give him any information. I respect my owners. I'm not there to give out information to him or anybody else. And he hated me for it, and he cursed me for it any number of times, and this was his revenge. Well, the guy got excellent revenge. He knew what he was doing because the track was Belmont Racetrack, which borders on New York City and Nassau County. And when Sandino was apprehended, supposedly with the joint, that could have taken one of three different paths that could have gone to the New York State Racing and Wagering Board as an administrative charge against him, in which case he probably would have been suspended for 30 days or something like that, which was pretty normal under the circumstances because they knew that jockeys did this all the time and they couldn't stop it. But they didn't want the word to get out, so they would just bury it with a small suspension and forget about it. Or it could go to New York City cops, where it would be probably thrown out in no time because it was, in criminal law parlance, a bullshit case, a piece of crap, and it didn't amount to anything. And then in New York, where they have serious crimes to consider, plenty of them, nobody needs these kinds of cases. Or it could have gone to Nassau County. Now, Nassau County is the eastern neighbor of New York City. It's Queens County. Nassau County is affluent. They've got plenty of cops, well paid, and very little to do. And they tend to blow things up in Nassau County because they don't have a lot of things to do. And the head Pinkerton, who was Sandy's adversary, the arresting officer, he called the Nassau authorities, and he did it on purpose because he knew this would be a bigger deal in Nassau than it would be in the city or at the Racing and Wagering Board. It was a pretty crafty and spiteful piece of work on his part. As a result, the Nassau County Police and the district attorney, they arrested Sandy, took him into custody, and typical of the county, they made a big thing out of it. And they told Sandy, tell us everything you know about what goes on at the racetrack, all the carryings on at the racetrack, all the illegality, the drugs, the fixing races, etc., the gambling, extortion, loan sharking. You tell us everything you know, or you're looking at years and years and years in jail with a long sentence. This is over this nonsense of a charge based on the supposed joint that Sandino had. Well, true to form, Sandy was a real man, and he said, I don't know anything. I don't know what you're talking about. So they prosecuted him. They didn't like it. They prosecuted him. And he eventually pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor, which ordinarily wouldn't be a problem, except now the Racing and Wagering Board used that misdemeanor. Misdemeanor is a crime. It's a minor crime, but it is a crime. They used that criminal conviction to ban him for life from the racetrack. Now, this is a guy that's 4'8", and at the racetrack as a jockey, he's a king. Out on the street, he's a 4'8" little guy with no education, and there's not much he's going to do that's going to compare to anything like being a jockey and being a prince at the racetrack. Sandino, in desperation, went back to Panama, where he came from, and he was working in the racetracks in Panama, which in racing parlance are called bull rings because they're just brutal. They use untrained horses down there. They're not well schooled, and the horses are liable to do anything, which adds to the danger. Now, horse racing is the most dangerous sport. People don't know this. It's the most dangerous, most deadly, and most injurious sport in the world. It beats auto racing or anything else. Scuba diving, mountain climbing, you name it. Nothing is as dangerous. Boxing, football, nothing. Hockey is as dangerous as horse racing. It's the most deadly and injurious sport of all. You don't hear about it because there are very, very big money interest involved, and they cover that up and they keep it pretty quiet. But it is. In the course of his working back down in Panama at the bull ring racetracks, he's riding an unschooled horse. He pulls up on the reins, and the horse rears up and falls backwards onto Sandino. He had been riding down there for 2 years when this happened. This unschooled horse backs up, falls on Sandino, and Sandino, when he was in our office, lifted up his shirt and showed us what happened. He had a round scar where his stomach burst. It looked like he was hit with a cannon shot. All the scar tissue in a round circle in the middle of his abdomen. And that laid him up for a year. He couldn't race anymore down there, and he didn't want to under those dangerous conditions. So he came back to New York, and he got a job on construction. One of the owners at the racetrack who remembered him and liked him. He was a very likable guy. Sandino had a big personality. He was a real sweetheart, and he was a stand-up guy. So this man had a construction company, and he hired him as part of the general contractors, which basically are cleaning up on construction jobs after all the other trades. So Sandy was basically pushing a broom on a construction job when he came to our office. And he was looking to get back to the racetrack naturally because that was his real bread and butter and that was his life. So when he told us the story, my partner and I decided that he would take the case because he was in horse racing from the harness end, and this came from horse racing sources, and he would handle this as an administrative hearing. We would petition the New York State Racing and Wagering Board to hear the case and appeal Sandino's suspension. Lifelong suspension, which is very, very harsh. That's unheard of. Unless somebody killed somebody, I mean, at the racetrack. I haven't heard of it. So we agreed, and my partner Joe eventually got a hearing date and went off to the hearing in the World Trade Center, the old World Trade Center, where the New York State Racing and Wagering Board had offices up on the 48th or 49th floor. And he was there for 2 days, and he kept coming back, and I would check with him in the evening and say, how's it going? He says, it's terrible. I said, why? He says, because the hearing officer couldn't care less about anything that I'm saying about evidence or introducing or anything in the story at all. He said, this guy is cold as ice. Well, that made sense because the hearing officer at the Racing and Wagering Board was a veteran of the old Waterfront Commission in the 1950s. He had been a hearing officer for the New York City Waterfront Commission, which was charged with purging the docks of communists and criminals. Well, there were no communists on the New York docks to begin with. And as for criminals, most of the longshoremen were ultra-conservative, right-wing sorts of guys, super patriots. There were no communists. If there were any communists around there, he couldn't get along with anybody. And the criminals, well, they got some criminals. They got some minor criminals off the dock. They left the major ones, and all the minor ones were replaced immediately by other minor criminals. So it went nowhere fast. But the Waterfront Commission developed a reputation which was right out of the gulag. You know, they just did whatever they wanted to do, and the devil be damned. Then everybody got convicted. Anybody went there, there were no rules of evidence or anything else. They did exactly what they wanted to do, and threw the book at everybody. So this guy, it was no surprise that he was not sympathetic to anybody who was brought before him as a prior convict, as a convicted subject, as it were. So, what happens? My partner's pretty disgusted. I said, look, do you want to win this case? He says, are you kidding me? Of course I want to win this case. What are we doing here? I said, well, we're going to win the case right now. He said, oh, really? I said, yeah, really. I said, you just stand by. I'm going to make a couple of phone calls. I said, we're going to win this case. He said, this guy, this hearing officer, I don't know how we're going to win this case. This guy is no better than, he's got all the warmth of a cockroach. I said, well, cockroaches, they run from searchlight and light. I said, and we're going to put the searchlight on this guy. And I made 3 phone calls. And in each of the phone calls, the conversation was the same. Come to the Trade Center tomorrow morning. What's going on is right out of the Russian archipelago, the Gulag archipelago. You're not going to believe it. You only have to stay 15 minutes. If you're not convinced that what I'm telling you is the absolute truth, this guy is getting screwed over royally, and nobody cares, and he's a decent person. If you don't see that after 15 minutes and recognize it, you're welcome to go home. I understand you have to go out and make a living and write a story, because these 3 guys were reporters. One of them was Jimmy Breslin, who wrote racing for years for the Daily News. The other one was Ray Kerrison, who wrote racing and became the sports editor for the New York Post. And the other one was the racing writer for the New York Times, Mike Katz. And being eminently decent guys, they all showed up the next morning, and I went there to meet them. And we went up to the hearing room, and my partner Joe continued the hearing. And thankfully, these guys went unrecognized by the hearing officer, and he behaved in his usual cavalier fashion, just stomping on anything that Joe said or tried to do or say or introduce. And these guys remained with their mouths open. They couldn't believe this was happening. They didn't say anything. But I saw them at recess, and they said, don't worry about it. We're all going to write about this. And that night, in 3 newspapers in New York, there were 3 columns, all of them along the same lines, with basically give Sandino a break. The next morning, we all came back to the hearing officer, and he was steaming. He was levitating. He wasn't even, his feet weren't even on the ground. The steam was coming out of his ears. He looked like a helicopter. He saw us, and he got, my partner and I, and he got really, really crazy. And he flipped out, and he left the hearing room, went back to his office, and 10 minutes later, we got called and said, the court officer said, the hearing officer wants to see you. The commissioner wants to see you. The trial commissioner wants to see you in his office. Okay. Now, I knew we had the guy. As soon as he blew his top, I knew we had him because we touched a nerve. And now it's all public. And what he was doing was public, and he couldn't stand the light of publicity. He called us back there, and he said, this is outrageous. This is this, and that. Blew off a little more steam and then got to the point. He said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. If you'll agree to drop this hearing and drop this appeal, we'll keep the suspension in effect for 6 more months, and we'll restore his license after 6 months. So I turned to Sandino. I said, Sandy, can you wait 6 months? Are you okay with that, or do you want to go ahead? He said, look, after 3 years and more, I can wait 6 months. Are they going to really give me my license back? I said, yes, you'll get it back. It's a matter of record, and we have the reporters here, and everybody else is going to know about it. I asked the reporters to hold up on the story, and they did. Sandy said, I can do the 6 months more, no problem, as long as I know that I'm going to get back on the racetrack. And he did. He got back on the racetrack 6 months later, and the guys wrote complimentary stories as well when the time came. And when we had to go back to actually get, 6 months later, when we had to go back and actually get Sandy's license and put on the record his restoration of his license, I was wearing a plaid sport jacket, and Sandino was looking at me, and he said, oh, I love that jacket you got. I was going to have one made like that for me. I said, yeah, well, why didn't you do it? He said, nah, you tall. You could carry that plaid. And I said, wow, that's pretty good. At 5'7", I've never been called tall, but I guess it's all relevant. And you got to also remember what happened here was a pretty pleasant memory, and that is that in the light of publicity, we shrunk a very, very big man down to size, and that was that hearing officer who was heartless. Best of all, Sandino regained his stature as a big man at the racetrack. Thanks for listening. Come back next week for another episode of Uncommon Law, lessons they don't teach in law school. I'm Judge Rudy Greco. Court is adjourned.